we have to fear is
in war.
fear itself.
There is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. We're looking at things from both a biblical and a historical point of view. So many issues today that, frankly, David, the biblical point of view is just completely left out. And too often it's because we've intimidated our pastors into thinking they can't even speak on issues that the Bible actually talks about, especially over the next couple of months as we come into this political season with an election coming up. You have a lot of people wondering if pastors should talk about that or not.
Yeah, it is a real problem, and it does occur every year or every 2 years. There are those on the other side who believe in free speech for themselves but not for anybody else, and they are big government people, and they want also government to control churches and what is said in churches. And, man, the best way to lose your freedoms is to have government in charge of your freedoms rather than defending your freedoms. So what happens is, as you come to election cycles, as we are now, we've just about finished most of the primary season. Very few primaries left. We're about to get into the general election season, and that's when a lot of pastors will encourage people to go vote, or they'll put out voters' guides, or they'll talk about issues that are in the news related to elections, and that's always bad for the other side. The other side wants to depress voter turnout on our side. What makes it easier for liberal progressive leftists to win is if conservative Christian folks, conservative biblical folks, conservative Jewish folks on the right don't show up. And how do you keep them from showing up? You don't let them know there's an election. You don't talk about the issues in the election. You keep voters from being educated on those issues. How do you do that? You keep pastors from talking about those issues. So this is not a new thing. This has been going for decades, for about the last, 6 or 7 or 8 years or whatever. We've worked with Alliance Defending Freedom, as several groups have, to make sure pastors know that, look, guys, you got a right for free speech. You can stand at the pulpit. You can talk about these issues. You can talk about voters' guides. You can put voters' guides out. But the intimidation factor is working. For example, in 2008, 28% of churches either mentioned voting or put a voters' guide out in their church. But by 2012, that was down to only 14% of churches. And we're talking one or the other. We're not talking putting voters' guides out. We're talking either saying, hey, guys, there's an election on Tuesday, remember to vote, or, hey, on the table out in front, we've got voters' guides. If you want to look and see where these candidates stand on issues, you can look at that. Only 1 out of 7 churches is even doing something as simple as saying go vote on Tuesday. So there is a big intimidation factor that's come against us, and here it is again now. Our secular folks on the other side, Freedom from Religion Foundation, have some time back filed a lawsuit against the IRS saying, we're going to file a lawsuit to make you investigate churches, to make you listen to their sermons, to make you stop these guys from talking about issues like marriage and like abortion, etc. And that suit had been dropped. Freedom from Religion Foundation pulled back and said, we've dismissed the suit. And we thought, oh, that's great. They figured out they can't win. But then we found out, no, they dropped the suit because they had reached a settlement with the IRS. And that's not a good deal. And so under the settlement, the IRS has agreed that it will investigate churches and that it will go after churches. And so since this is a legal issue, and since it has been a legal issue, and since it will be a legal issue until the Johnson Amendment is struck down, which authorizes all this kind of nonsense, until that happens, you need legal people to make it really clear that, yes, there is a Constitution, and yes, it does protect your sermons and you and your activities in church, and no, you don't have to be afraid of this. And one of the great spokesmen on that has been Matt Staver, Dean of Liberty Law School and also head of Liberty Counsel.
Well, in fact, it's guys like Matt that hopefully can make pastors feel more comfortable and confident in being able to speak out on these issues. It's kind of hard to go do that if you don't know that some folks got your back that they can take on the fight with, whether it's the IRS or whoever it is. And Matt Staver is one of those guys that you definitely want in your corner. Matt Staver will be with us when we return right here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Revisions today often assert that our founding fathers were atheists or agnostics or deists. This charge is not new. In fact, Patrick Henry was even called a deist in his lifetime. Clearly, no one could question his patriotism, but Henry was hurt that they would question his Christianity. Against the charge that he was a deist, Patrick Henry thundered, "Deism, with me, is but another name for vice and depravity. I hear it is said by the deists that I am one of their number, and indeed, that some good people think I am no Christian. This thought gives me much more pain than being called a traitor. Being a Christian is a character which I prize far above all this world has or can boast." Patrick Henry was quick to refute the charge of deism and to declare his open belief as a Christian.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Our guest today from Liberty Counsel, our good friend Matt Staver. Matt, always good to have you. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you. My pleasure to be with you.
Hey, I know you got a million different issues going on and tons of cases, but I also know you got your eye on this IRS situation targeting churches now. And I'm a little confused because we've had some great victories on this front, but yet now they seem to be motivated to do the bidding of Freedom from Religion Foundation and others.
Yeah, this is outrageous. Of course, the settlement that they entered into with Freedom from Religion Foundation has not yet been approved by the judge because there's been some other interveners and some religious co-defendants that objected to this settlement and were not even apprised of the settlement. So as of yet, it hasn't been assigned by the judge, but certainly it's been presented to the judge by the IRS. And this settlement would require the IRS, essentially, or volunteer the IRS, if you will, to monitor churches. And they've actually told the Freedom from Religion Foundation that that's what they'll do. But the fact is, not one church ever has lost its tax-exempt status for either political activity regarding candidates or lobbying for or against legislation or local law or state law. Not one has ever lost its tax-exempt status.
Now, that's an important fact for
battle.
people to recognize and pastors to hear even now because they've been intimidated and put in a position of fear. So once again, not one church has lost that tax-exempt status for speaking out on the issues and even talking about candidates.
That's right. And so here's the only way they're going to win this battle. I can tell you, at the end of the day, substantively on the merits, if they actually came after a church, that's a battle they will not win. Certainly Liberty Counsel will defend and give counsel to churches free of charge. That's a battle they won't win. But here's the battle they could win. And that's exactly what we're talking about, intimidation. If pastors and churches, church leaders are intimidated under the false impression that they're going to lose their tax-exempt status because the IRS is going to start to come after them, and they voluntarily withhold information, step back from the line, don't speak the truth out of fear, that's how they win. They win by us letting them win. This is a battle IRS cannot win on the merits. They only win if you remain silent.
You're saying, look, the IRS doesn't have a bullet in their gun that's going to be effective. They will lose unless we're just intimidated by the empty gun. We're intimidated by threats, really.
That's right. The only way the IRS will win is if pastors are voluntarily silent because they believe that they will jeopardize their tax-exempt status, erroneously so. But if they believe it and they self-censor, then that's how the IRS wins. If the IRS were to ever pull the trigger and come after a church, they will not win that battle. On the merits, they will not win the battle. But it's kind of like pointing a gun at you. If you're fearful because someone's pointing a gun at you and you freeze, not knowing that, in fact, the gun is not loaded or the gun is not real, then you're going to be frozen just as though the gun's real. The fact of the matter is, this is a bogus threat. The IRS, if they try to pull the trigger, will not win. They'll lose that battle. But if they scare you into silence and if you self-censor, that's how they'll win. So we want to encourage pastors to understand this. Going back to how we began, not one church ever in the history of America, not one has ever lost its tax-exempt status for political activity involving candidates or for lobbying for or against any kind of law. Not one. And not one's going to lose their status even under this new threat of investigating churches.
Tell us about the Who Will Stand effort that you guys are working on, because it seems like this will help pastors get more bold.
It is, and that's really what we're trying to do. We're doing several things. First of all, we're sending out a DVD called Silence is Not an Option to about 150,000 pastors across the country. And we can provide that through Liberty Counsel at no cost. Second thing we're doing is we're holding rallies across the country with pastors, meetings with pastors, about a 90-minute presentation. And we're talking about what pastors and churches can do and what they should do biblically. And then what we're also doing is about 4 to 6 weeks after we're meeting with pastors, we're coming back to their same area. And in churches in their area, we're holding a 2-hour, hour and 45-minute Who Will Stand rally. And those Who Will Stand rallies have speakers. David Barton is in those messages, giving a special message just for pastors in the first one and Christians in the pews in the second one. Governor Mike Huckabee, many others. I'm there as well. And people are coming away from these events. They're encouraged, they're inspired, and they're getting information on not only how they can stand up, but why they should stand up and how they can make a difference. So we're doing that around the country, and people can go to the pastorsandchurches.org website, pastorsandchurches.org, or whowillstandraally.com, whowillstandraally.com, to find out where these are located. And if you want to host one in your church, you can always go to those websites and make an inquiry or call Liberty Counsel.
Whowillstandraally.com. There's a list of dates already on the calendar coming up. You can go there to find out when one's coming close to you. And if there's not one coming close to you, you can click on an opportunity to request that one of these rallies come to you as well. Stay with us. Matt Staver is our guest. You're listening to WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Joseph Story is one of the most important names in American jurisprudence. Not only was he placed on the U.S. Supreme Court by President James Madison, but he also founded Harvard Law School and authored numerous legal works on the Constitution. While today's revisionists claim that the goal of the First Amendment was absolute religious pluralism, Justice Joseph Story vehemently disagreed. He declared, "The real object of the First Amendment was not to encourage, much less to advance Mohammedanism or Judaism or infidelity by prostrating Christianity, but was to exclude all rivalry among Christian denominations." According to founder Joseph Story, Christianity, not pluralism, was the goal of the Founding Fathers in the First Amendment, for only a Christian nation is tolerant and thus is truly pluralistic.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. Matt Staver with us from Liberty Counsel. We've been talking about the rallies that are happening across the country for pastors. And so, Matt, seems so important. The timing is perfect for you guys to be doing this. A lot of pastors maybe are even asking the question, okay, I want to get involved, but boy, they sure didn't teach me this at seminary. So they're wanting to know how to make a difference and where the line is, if you will. I've had Eric Stanley from ADF say, hey, there is no line, Rick. It's pastors ought to have free speech. Do you share that same sentiment that, hey, these guys shouldn't be muzzled in the pulpit?
Absolutely, I do. I mean, when we're talking about, even from a scriptural standpoint to begin with as our foundation, the scripture says, and it comes from Jesus, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And obviously our duty to God is preeminent over our duty to Caesar. And when God calls a pastor to preach and calls the pastor to speak on biblical truth, the pastor should do so, and the pastor should do so without any fear, and the pastor should be able to do so legally. And that's why what we see is pastors, unfortunately, being intimidated into silence because the secularist, the left, wants the pastor to remain silent. So they give them all kinds of scare tactics, all kinds of myths. But in reality, the fact is, not one pastor has ever been struck by lightning. Not one church has ever lost its tax-exempt status because they've spoken out on biblical moral issues that happen to transect with and intersect with politics, politicians, and laws before the legislature or the local government. For example, just in Fayetteville, Arkansas, just a few days ago, the Fayetteville City Council passed this outrageous ordinance regarding sexual orientation and gender identity. That's going to have a direct impact on churches and pastors. Now, the pastors got involved in that, and they're going to continue to get involved by working to repeal that particular law. But what we need to do is not only get involved after the fact, but pastors need to speak before the fact. People in the congregations need to be engaged long before these things ever come for final vote.
You talk about the truth setting you free, just knowing what you have said, just knowing that there's not a bullet in that gun, that they cannot shut you down or take away your tax-exempt status. Just that truth alone should set those pastors free. That's got to be liberating for them, because I know a lot of times they feel the pressure of a congregant or a board member or whoever saying, hey, don't you dare talk about that stuff because we might lose our tax-exempt status. They got people pulling at them from all over. How wonderful to have that truth.
They do. You know, Pastor John Hagee, he watched the Silence is Not an Option video, DVD, that I did. And he called me up and he said, I feel like an inmate let out of prison. Because everybody tries to tell me what I can't do, and you told me what I can do. It literally felt like an inmate let out of prison, and that's John Hagee's words. And John Hagee, you know, he's always been very strong and bold, but he gets the same thing from people. You can't say this, Pastor Hagee. You can't say that. You're going to jeopardize the church's tax-exempt status. Oh, that's a myth. And that's what we want to do. We want to free pastors and give them the freedom that God has ultimately placed on their heart to speak truth unvarnished, without fear of Uncle Sam coming in and revoking your tax-exempt status.
Last thing, Matt, before I let you go, the impact this will have on the culture. Isn't this really at the heart of how we have ended up in the mess we are, not applying biblical worldview to all these cultural issues? And if we get pastors to know that they're free to do that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, how do you see that being a game changer for the culture?
Well, let me go back to the Fayetteville, Arkansas situation. If pastors there had really been speaking and getting people involved in addressing the culture, because the Bible speaks on and addresses every one of our life issues, we probably wouldn't have had a situation like this. Why? Because we probably would have had people in the congregation, in the pews, that would actually have gone out and vote to not allow these people to be their agents, or they would have gone out and run for office, and they would be sitting there on the city council, and instead of trying to combat these immoral, a-religious, secularist laws, we would have people that are in office that reflect our biblical values and are real agents of us that we can be proud of.
Yeah, that's, man, no doubt. It's what you're saying is it'll prevent the problem in the first place, let alone will it teach the congregation how to respond to the problem if it does come up.
Absolutely. So that's why we want to make sure that pastors first. You know, if you go back to the American Revolution, and David Barton does this so well, it was the sermons of pastors that was the fuel of the American Revolution. Without pastors, we would have never had a spiritual revival in an American Revolution. Pastors were critical in that spiritual renewal and in the revival and the revolution of the United States of America. Without pastors, we wouldn't be here today. We'd have a whole different complexity. And that's where we are today. We need pastors to speak up and regain their biblical calling and be unafraid. We want them to take off the muzzle that the world wants to put on them and replace it with a megaphone.
Well, they're the key to the true renewal across the country, Matt. Thanks for standing up for them and helping to get them the information and these rallies across the country. Folks can go to the website today at whowillstandraally.com. We'll also have links to Liberty Counsel's website, lc.org. Matt, God bless you, brother. Keep up the great work. We'll have you back again soon.
Thank you. My pleasure to be with you.
That's Matt Staver. Stay with us. Back in a moment with David Barton. Have you ever wanted to learn more about the United States Constitution but just felt like, man, the classes are boring, or it's just that old language from 200 years ago, or I don't know where to start. People want to know, but it gets frustrating because you don't know where to look for truth about the Constitution either. Well, we've got a special program for you available now called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green, and it's actually a teaching done on the Constitution at Independence Hall in the very room where the Constitution was framed. We take you both to Philadelphia, the cradle of liberty in Independence Hall, and to the WallBuilders Library, where David Barton brings the history to life to teach the original intent of our founding fathers. We call it the Quick Start Guide to the Constitution because in just a few hours through these videos, you will learn the Citizen's Guide to America's Constitution. You'll learn what you need to do to help save our constitutional republic. It's fun, it's entertaining, and it's going to inspire you to do your part to preserve freedom for future generations. It's called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. You can find out more information on our website now at wallbuilders.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Thanks to Matt Staver for his time today and the great work they do at Liberty Law School there at Liberty University and also Liberty Counsel. So, David, if more pastors speak out, if more pastors apply the Bible to what's happening in the culture, specifically politics and government, what happens?
Well, what happens is what had happened for hundreds of years before is you get a healthy culture. You get people who actually think biblically, which we don't have right now. George Barna and I just finished a book, just turned it in. It'll be out in a few weeks. And it looks at brand new polling. Barna, who's done tens of thousands of polls, looks at where the church is right now, and it's not very healthy, bro. It's just not healthy, and it's understandable why more and more people don't want to go to church, because there's nothing really relevant for them at church. In my case, the way I explain it to pastors is, guys, I'm a Christian. I don't need to get saved 52 weeks out of every year. And what you're covering in the pulpit on Sundays is a salvation message. And so what does that do for guys like me who are already Christians? We get nothing to go out and live with on Monday. But you won't talk about what's on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday because you're scared that somebody's going to get offended or the IRS is going to come after you or whatever. And so you just stick with something like a sinner's prayer every week. You got to get past that. And that's what the polling is showing, that we're losing this because even 2/3 of Christians think that church is irrelevant for their daily life. They get nothing from it. So if we were to change and get back to actually speaking the truth, and you know, as you pointed out, people do like it when you have backbone and courage. When you stand up, people respond to that. And churches are having backbones of jello right now, and they're not talking about the issues. And there's not a biblical precedent for that, by the way. So we would have a much healthier culture. We would have much stronger faith. We would not be losing the number of kids we're losing to college because our faith would be much more practical and applicable. There's just so many things that would be different. And what we've got that I have to keep pointing out, I mean, Matt said it, and you said it before the break, is Matt's got your back on this. And how many cases has he ever lost against the IRS? The answer is 0, because as he points out, nobody's ever lost their tax exemption. Well, I might be the first one. No, that's like standing on the top of a 100-story building and dropping a rock and say, this time it's going to go upward rather than downward. When you've got the law on your side, the laws of gravity, and in this case, you've got federal law and Constitution on your side, you're not going to lose that case. So as Matt said, the IRS cannot win on the law. They can only win on intimidation. And if we continue to kowtow and bow down to intimidation and not get some backbone, then we're going to keep losing, not because of the law, but because we keep shooting ourselves in the foot. And to make one other thing here that I think is really, really key, a point on this, I can understand why the IRS would agree to an out-of-court settlement with Freedom from Religion Foundation, because we've tried for years to get the IRS to take bait and take any of these churches in the court, because we know that when we get in court, we will whack them. They will lose. Constitutionally, legally, they're going to lose. Well, the IRS knows that too, and that's why they have not taken the bait for 6 or 7 straight years, however many times it's been, more than 10,000 requests filed with them to please come after this church because they've crossed the line, and they won't do it because they know they can't win. But now, if you agree to an out-of-court settlement that says, you know what, if you'll drop your lawsuit, we'll agree to monitor what churches say in the pulpit, they have just given themselves power they did not have before. By agreeing to an out-of-court settlement, they have agreed to bind themselves to do something that they cannot do by the law. And that's why this out-of-court settlement really is so onerous. Now, again, as Matt points out, we'll take this into court if we have to, too. But right now, the IRS has given themselves more power than they've had by agreeing to an out-of-court settlement. But it shouldn't matter to anybody, any Christian anywhere. Do not give up your right of free speech. Do not give up your backbone. Stand for what's right. Speak God's word. Do not be intimidated by civil authorities.
Amen. And realize how important it is to do this and not just keep pushing it to the side. I think sometimes maybe it's easier to just avoid the subject and find other things to talk about. But we got to wake them up to realize this is too important to not be willing to take it.
It's too important, and if I can just be real blunt, I was on church staff for a number of years, ordained minister, associate pastors, all these things. I do not want to have to stand in front of God. And he says, now, why is it that I say in my word about abortion and marriage, and I talk about military, and I talk about taxes and economics, I talk about education, I talk about all these things. Why is it I talk about all that and you won't? Why is it that you had 200 in your crowd or 500 in your crowd or sometimes 10,000 in our crowd? And why is it you wouldn't tell them what I've so clearly said in the Word? Well, you want to explain to me why you weren't willing to teach what I say in the Word? I don't want to be in the position of having to answer to God for that. And that's where many pastors will be if they don't get some backbone and start standing up. They need to consider what they're going to say to God when God asks them that question.
Amen. Good stuff. Folks, thanks for listening. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green.
We stand undivided forever.